City Council. Please attend a call meeting of the City Council to be held in the 6th floor conference room, 801 Crawford Street, 5 p.m. Tuesday, August 11, 2015, for the purpose of a public work session. In addition, you may consider a motion to go into close by order of the mayor. Mr. Cherry?
Here.
Dr. Edmonds? Mr. Meeks?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Here.
Ms. Simmons?
Here.
Dr. Whitaker? Mayor Wright?
Here.
Brandon?
Good afternoon, Mr. Manager. How are you,
Good
sir?
afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, members of council. Our first item on the work session agenda tonight is to brief you on an item that's on your regular agenda. I'm going to ask Brian Foster, Public Utilities Director, to come and address that. This is an item for an appropriation in the Utilities Fund addressing equipment that was ordered last fiscal year but not purchased, so it's going to be or it was delivered in FY16. We need to reappropriate it in this year's budget, and then also an appropriation for some sludge removal costs related to the water treatment plant lagoons.
Okay.
See, it was delivered.
It was delivered in this fiscal year, ordered in last fiscal year.
Yeah, it will. It's actually will be delivered in the next week or so, but it's not yet here.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. This is an item it's a supplemental appropriation, and at least part of it is a request for reappropriation. Just to give you some additional explanation, it's two parts. The first is, as Mr. Godfrey mentioned, is for some equipment. It's a tractor and bush hog for where we mow our rights-of-way for our main transmission lines and our force mains. It's to replace 1994 equipment that's we can't keep in service with parts, and we can't keep it operational. It was ordered, and because it was ordered last year, it was budgeted for last year, but because it did not arrive by June 30, we cannot use funds because it's operating funds. So those funds were encumbered. They were not spent. And we just need those reappropriated. And that's $108,325. The second part is for as part of our water treatment process, the sludge, the byproduct where we remove all the organics and everything, is pumped to our waste lagoon where it settles out. And we have to periodically remove that. That dates back to a 2002 consent order where we had to come up with a residuals management plan, so we periodically remove that. We had been on an every other year cycle where we remove a lot more every other year. And this coming year, fiscal 16, we are switching to an annual basis. It makes it a little more easier for budgeting purposes, and it's easier for the contractor, because we can bid a multi-year project. And so we just underestimated what we needed. We budgeted $800,000, and the bids came in at $820,000. And then with the inspection and testing and all that has to be done, we're about $120,000 short. So we're asking that be added to our budget for fiscal 16. So when you add those two items together, that's where you come up with the $228,325. But for future budgets, so in FY17 and forward, because we did a multi-year bid with the known escalator, we can budget exactly what's needed for the sludge removal. So you will not have a reoccurrence of this issue. We just got caught in the first year and we did not estimate correctly. And so that's what the two items are.
Okay. And what is this sludge we're moving out? How much of this stuff we need to take out per year?
Yeah, it's per year. We remove several hundred tons a year from the lagoon. And so what we do is, it settles out. And we do a survey usually every year that measures how much is there. And so we just have to keep enough out. We never truly empty it. We're just basically keeping up with what's deposited.
Get it. Now, I'm back on the first item, and then I'll go to you, Mr. Meeks. This bush hog that we're getting, why can't we contract that out? That's just for cutting grass around our...
Well, it's for where our transmission lines run through Suffolk and our force mains in various places. It's just difficult area to get to. It's not nice and wide open and easy. It's not mowing. it's some difficult terrain. So we've always done it. We've always done it ourselves. I mean, could we contract it out? We could certainly look at doing that, but we feel it would be more expensive because we do contract some that's easy to get to, but this is a little more difficult. That's why we've always done it
All
ourselves.
right. Ms. Meeks?
The sludge part, you said it was 800. What's all for the contract? What all is the company doing? Are they just hauling that, or are they
No,
testing
they dredge, they dewater, then they haul it off, and this company, I think, is getting a land application permit, so they'll land apply it, and so we monitor that for their environmental permits, make sure all that's in order. The other option is sometimes in the past they've just landfilled it. So
Could we take it at our landfill?
No, because ours is a C&D. It's not considered construction demolition debris. So our landfill's not permitted for it.
So we have to go to MSW landfill.
Correct. An MSW, or you have to get environmental permits to do land application, which we don't have that in Portsmouth either.
What do you know the disposal piece of it? How much a year is it that goes to disposal of the contract?
I don't. It's a lump sum contract. I don't think it was broken out. But I'll have to go back and look at them. And if we have that information, I'll be happy to provide it to you. But I believe it was just a lump sum, so I don't think it's broken out.
Yeah, I don't have anything for this question, but it's just a general question. On our purchasing policies, because it's not about you. No, it's not about you or this. You can see that.
Thank you.
You know, we had a lot of discussion about other equipment that we paid for and never haven't received. And this is the right way to do it, I think, COD. This is the way you do it. So why the difference? We pay a bunch of money for other equipment we haven't even seen yet or touched. But now we're doing this in the right way. We're appropriating the money when it's supposed to be paid for. So
We recognize it, and we're bringing it to you and trying to do it the right way. We did talk at the last meeting about getting a list of all the equipment that was purchased in FY15 and what we've purchased so far in FY15, or 16, what we have budgeted in FY16. I just got that this afternoon. I haven't had a chance to look at it, so I'm going to review that, and I'll convey that to you by memo, hopefully tomorrow or later this week at the latest, so you have that information. But it'll describe the equipment, how much it cost, and when it was ordered.
I was asking the mayor a question.
Yes, sir.
I got what you're saying, but you understand what I'm saying.
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Thank you.
We're,
Thank you for that.
We're trying to address it the right way, which is when things are not spent in the prior fiscal year, you can't wait and charge it back in the next fiscal year. You have to reappropriate that in the next fiscal year.
And can we talk before you send the memo out? I just want to have a conversation with you first.
Sure.
All right.
All right. Next item, sir.
The next item is going to be presented by Planning Director Bob Baldwin. This is related to some recent court action that would make our city code, zoning code, prescribed process for Planning Commission approvals of Type 2 site plans in conflict with the state code. And Bob's going to talk about the conflict and about some possible ways forward for amending our code to resolve that conflict.
Bob, there's a current conflict, and you're going to show us how to navigate through that. And
Try my best and hopefully get some guidance from council if you're comfortable with what we're going to suggest.
Okay.
There's definitely a current conflict.
Okay.
And I'll try to be as brief as I can on this, but if you have any questions, I'm not an attorney, but I can tell you we've worked extensively with the city attorney's office reviewing the implications of this case. And the case is an Albemarle County case from 2012. It's identified as Sinclair versus New Singular Wireless. Kind of stayed under the radar for a lot of us because it was a case dealing with telecommunications towers and steep slopes. And those are typically not really hot topics for us these days. In this case, what happened was in the Albemarle County zoning ordinance, they have a provision to take applications to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission has the authority to approve waivers for dealing with their steep slopes. They approved one, and the property owner, Mr. Sinclair, filed suit. His original complaint was that the Planning Commission had, in fact, provided a waiver or a variance like the Board of Zoning Appeals might do, and they weren't authorized to do variances, and that was the original complaint. And the state Supreme Court didn't find that was the case. However, what they did determine is, in fact, that the Planning Commission doesn't have authority to grant any waivers. And so they found there's no statutory authority for the county to delegate that authority to the Planning Commission. And so what you really have is the primary things to take away from the Sinclair case is that planning, and we're Dillon Rule State, we always have to keep that in mind when it comes to zoning. Planning Commission's authority is specifically enumerated in the state code. The governing body can't delegate them to do things that the state code doesn't authorize them to do. The waiver procedure that the Planning Commission was doing is not enumerated as one of the authorities under the state code. As you know, the Planning Commission's primary role is recommending body to the City Council. They're not supposed to be making a whole lot of decisions. And therefore, the Supreme Court concluded that was a Dillon Rule violation, and they weren't allowed to do that process. And that, for them, a very narrowly tailored waiver provision they just had for steep slopes. This wasn't, a broader application of authority for the Planning Commission other than that. So why is that important to us? Well, back in 2010, new zoning ordinance went into effect, all three elements of it. There was a focus on building form, less on land use regulation, a lot more prescriptive regulations put in place, standard parking lot design, building designs, changing the way setbacks were done. And if you go back into section 40.1, 4.3, and 41-5, you can see some of those standards that are enumerated in our zoning code that are required for developers to comply with. In doing that, there was a realization that you're going to need some flexibility in the code. There was no way for all of these rules to be 100% complied with all the time. And so let me just back up for a second. The Type 2 process. I want to move ahead of myself. Type 2 process, we have two versions of site plan that are described in our zoning code. Type 1, I think when you hear us describe a site plan, the one that goes through engineering review and all of that, that's a typical Type 1 site plan. Type 2 process is actually a process in which the Planning Commission has been authorized to in fact vary or waive the standards of the zoning code. So as you see what's in our zoning code under 40.1-2.3D, it says they can provide, when the developer requests a change and provides compensating public benefits, certain standards can be varied by the Planning Commission. They have the authority to do that. It also states that the Planning Commission can review and make a decision on Type 2 development plans. So clearly, as we look at this thing, a little bit of an issue with the Sinclair case, and since the code went into effect, we've had 16 Type 2 site plans that have gone through the Planning Commission and been approved.
That means they never came to us. They were just approved by
Just approved by the Planning Commission. And we'll talk about, here's some of the
And
things.
those 16 are in question.
16 for 16.
They're in question because it's conflict?
Well, they're not in question, but going forward, okay, what's behind us is okay.
Okay.
Going forward is a problem. So here's some of the things that the code says the Planning Commission can do under a Type 2. They can increase residential density. They can increase non-residential intensity. They can change lot area, required yards, use separations, bulk standards. I'll give you an example of a couple of these as we go through here. They can increase lot covers. A large number of things. Some of these have historically been variances for the Board of Zoning Appeals. Some of these are things you just historically haven't been able to do, but under our code, this is the kind of authority the Planning Commission has been given to modify the standards with the goal of meeting the intent of the code while not exactly meeting the exact design standards of the regulation. Now, we did a little analysis of this thing of the 16, and there's more than 16 modifications have been approved. But we tried to bulk them into what are the primary things the developers are coming in the code and saying we're having problems complying with this. We'd like some flexibility in that. So we've had 5 that have dealt with parking lot layout. In fact, the last 2 were parking lot layout issues. We've had a few of these setbacks or build to lines. I'm going to show you one in a second. Separation distance. I'll give you an example. You may remember the PER application that you saw had a 500-foot separation distance from residential neighborhoods as a requirement in the zoning code. Now, they were outside of 500 feet, so there was no waiver required. But in other locations, where people couldn't meet the 500-foot requirement, the Planning Commission has the authority to reduce that separation distance. And there have been 3 sort of various other ones. And again, the typical application has more than one. When a developer comes in for one, they typically, get more than one. Other things they might like to request. So we'll look right across the street. Here's a good example of one. This is the Harbor Vista site. And I just want to make one note on this picture you see right here. This is an unusual site. It's got 4, it's an entire block. So it's got street frontage on 4 sides, and the street frontage causes a problem when you try to apply the regulation. So, being an infill lot or something in the middle of a block is one thing. When you've got road frontage all around, the standards get complicated. So here's one. And this is something you may not be aware of. You may be familiar with typical setback requirements. You see these must be 20 feet back or 30 feet back off the right-of-way. Downtown and in the D2, we have a required building line. And instead of being a setback, it tells you where the building has to be. It's prescribed. In downtown, it's at 0. So 0 lot line setback. And you're basically given 20 inches behind that so the building can have some articulation to not be a flat wall. So in this diagram here, because here's the curb, here's the property line, and here's a Cox easement. And so obviously the property, to be developed couldn't get to 0 because there's a Cox cable easement in the way. Well, the code didn't have any provision what to do in the event you can't go to 0. And the way the code intends you to deal with that issue is a Type 2 site plan. So where the building wound up behind that came out of that Type 2 process.
What's the setback now to clear the Cox
It's about 10 feet.
10 foot, really?
Yeah, behind the easement. It's behind that. It's a variable width easement. It's not a flat easement, but it's pretty close.
Didn't we have that at Quarters too?
Yes, Quarters was one of our 16 projects. They've gone through the Type 2 process. Kroger Marketplace, Midtown Marketplace, they went through the Type 2 process. Almost every major project we've had is, for one reason or another, gone through. Here's another issue. The design standards in the D1 require working entry doors every 100 feet. This project, as you know, has a structured parking on the ground floor, and simply could not get doors to work in 100-foot maximum spacing. So they requested fewer working entry doors on the ground floor. So that's what you're seeing there. That's actually the distance separations between the doors on the building. Instead of being 100 feet, they got obviously a few different distance separations. If that makes sense to you. This is Bart Street. It's Crawford, kind of orient you towards the building there, City Hall, across the street there. Okay, here's another requirement. This required building line in the zoning code requires that for 75% of that required building line, which is 0, you have to have building. And then past that 75%, the rest is supposed to be what they call a pedestrian wall. So the entire frontage basically is supposed to be filled in. Of course, again, I mentioned this idea when you got road frontage on 4 sides, that ends up being something that would look like a fortress, if you had that all the way around. So in this case, you've also got interior parking. And so they had an issue in there meeting that 75% requirement on all 4 sides. So they meet it on Crawford, they meet it on Bart, but as you turn the corners back there on Guardian, et cetera, you had some modifications. Basically get back into the parking lot and the parking garage. One last one, there's a provision, this is both in the downtown, the D1 and D2, that if you have a surface parking lot, it's supposed to be set back 30 feet off the right-of-way. And clearly when you're building in an urban environment, pushing that parking 30 feet in is problematic. So they got relief from the 30-foot standard. So there's an application. They went through Type 2. They got relief from all 4 of these standards so they can build the project. So that was done through the Planning Commission Type 2 process. Here's just one other one we'll show you. This is just a quick look at a map. I've mentioned these separation standards. And in our industrial district, in fact, in the zoning code, we've got, I think, about 29 different uses that have separation distance standards in there. In the industrial zone, for example, if you're doing a warehouse or some sort of a trucking operation, there's a 500-foot separation distance you have to be from any residential district. What you see in this map, everything that's in dark purple, or deep purple as some people like to say, dark purple, light purple, those are all industrial zones. Everything you see in dark purple is within 500 feet of a residential district, and therefore those kind of uses couldn't go in there. So you basically have 2/3 of the industrial property that you can't do a lot of uses in because of that separation standard. And that's another case where people have gone through the Type 2 process, request relief from the planning commission. We've had 3 of those. So it just gives you an indication of other applications of that Type 2 process. So, again, working with the attorney's office, we've gone back through and looked at our code under this Type 2. And I'll also mention one other thing in our downtown D1 and D2. The Type 2 approval process is actually broader. They can actually deal with architectural requirements. Many of those other features are actually reviewable by the Planning Commission under a Type 2. But following Sinclair, we've concluded that we simply don't have authority to take this to the Planning Commission. They are not an authorized body to make these kind of decisions. They can't waive, modify, vary any of these standards under the state code. And therefore, just like in Albemarle County, we've concluded that our Type 2 process has to be considered void. We can't have the Planning Commission doing Type 2 site plan review. It's simply not a permitted authority for the Planning Commission. It doesn't mean we don't need some processes. It just can't be the Planning Commission. So we come up with some next steps we'd like to discuss here tonight. One of those, obviously, we're going to modify our site plan processes to ensure we're in compliance with the Supreme Court decision. What changes we want to propose to the zoning code, we're still trying to stay consistent with the intent of the 2010 zoning regulations. So we're still trying to maintain design standards, raising the development bar, all of those things that were intended in 2010, just trying to get this in compliance with the state code. And then, again, we want to ensure that our site plan processes, which one of the reasons these things were going to the Planning Commission was for speed. You're in the middle of a site plan review. You can get a Type 2 site plan to the Planning Commission within 45 days, right within the site plan review process. Obviously, if it ended up as a use permit or something like that, where there's a 4-month gap in there, that slows down site plan review. So we're trying to be cognizant, and we're still trying to be efficient in our site plan review process. So here's what we'd like to, my slide here. What happened here? Let's get my last slide.
Okay. Charged up.
Here we go. All right. So, we want to do, first thing we want to do is we want to go back through the regulatory standards, the setback requirements, the things that are triggering Type 2 applications, and where we can suggest some alternate regulatory standards that don't trigger people wanting to go through a Type 2 process. We'd like to take a look at that. For example, how we deal with setbacks, trying to avoid needing to modify setbacks. And I think the standard you should look at is, trying to have regulations that you want to stand behind your regulations. You don't want to see them waived on every site plan, every project, getting some sort of a different set of standards. So that'd be the first thing. Obviously, the second thing we're going to go through here and modify this Type 2 site plan, take that away from the Planning Commission. There's a few of those items I mentioned that are historically gone through the process as a variance through the Board of Zoning Appeals. We've already started sending applications that way to go request variances.
Thank you.
The other thing we'll look at is alternative mechanisms for doing that. And one of the things we'd like to have you consider tonight, and something you may not be familiar with, is a special exception process. And under the state enabling legislation, when you think about doing a conditional use permit, which we bring to council pretty regularly, the authority for a special use permit is a legislative authority that the city council can actually delegate to the Board of Zoning Appeals. You can't delegate it to the Planning Commission, but you can delegate to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So where we can't fix things through some regulatory changes, some modifications to standards, and where things can't be handled by variances, which are supposed to be very narrowly tailored, site-specific, we'd like council to consider the possibility of creating a special exception process where some of these items which are going to the Planning Commission can be sent over to the Board of Zoning Appeals as special exceptions. And the special exceptions has a couple of positive things about it. It's a public hearing. It goes through all the advertising that we would normally do for other items going to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and it's appealable. One of the other issues in the Sinclair case, and it's also the case with our current Type 2 process. There's no appeal process for an affected adjacent property owner on our Planning Commission process, but under a special exception, that's appealable. So, again, what I guess we'd be proposing, like to see if council is interested, we would like to propose coming back, and obviously all this stuff will come back before City Council as we get more of the specifics. But the sort of the guiding concept here would be some zoning regulation modifications, and creating these other processes, for example, this special exception process, so we can continue to deal with the ordinance in a way that's in compliance with the state code. The one thing we know we can't do is continue down the path we have now with the Planning Commission doing it, because they're simply an unauthorized body for that. And be glad to answer any questions. If you have any particulars you want to talk about.
Special exception, I think, ought to be done by this body right here.
Yeah,
Not somebody else. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, if I could add just one question to you about that, and I'm not disagreeing. I just want to, what we've looked at on special exceptions is maybe 2 different levels of special exception. So, for example, where you saw on the list where the Planning Commission can look at increases in density or increases in intensity, that's clearly, in our minds, that's a use permit. That's a city council level question. Whether or not you want to get involved in some of these other site plan issues that might come up, modifying a parking lot or something like that, that would be the only, the idea we were thinking that the special exception process for the Board of Zoning Appeals would be more of a site plan kind of a question as opposed to a use question. But, that's obviously, if you want them all to come to the city council, we'll certainly can process them that way. That's not a problem at all. Only the time frame, that was the thing we were trying to get at.
I get you. We did a lot of changes in the last 6-8 months, whatever. Have we packaged all that together?
Yes. All those changes we've made, yes. We have a current version of the zoning code that has all the changes in it.
Can we
Sure, if you don't have it.
No.
I agree with that, because I think the public, I think there would be a larger degree of accountability. They can get their arms around us. So
It's your call. Council has pick. You wanted them all.
Be more comfortable with
It's not that many. We're averaging about 3 a year.
That's the point. It's not like you get one every, gonna get 4 or 5 every month.
That's correct.
So
And that wouldn't add time to the process for the investor, would it?
Well, it will slow the site plan process down. Obviously, again, to get this to city council takes about 4 months. Getting it through the Board of Zoning Appeals takes about 6 weeks.
Does
So
it have
there's-
to take 4 months?
Yes, because you got to go through the Planning Commission for a recommendation. It's a use permit. A special exception and a use permit under the state code, they're the same, except you have authority under the state code to delegate some of that if you want to.
but it's no different than anything else.
Oh, I agree.
So it's the process.
right.
Yeah.
So let's do the process. The process work. Let's do the process.
And we're hoping.
And everybody in the development world knows you don't decide today and build tomorrow. It's just the process.
Well, I'll tell you just a couple of things. We are hoping that some of the regulatory changes will eliminate some of the need for some of this. For example, we're working with Kimley Horn right now. One of the provisions under the Type 2 is modifying parking lot layout standards, and we think we can modify those, and some of those requests become just standard site plan review. They don't need to go through a special exception.
I don't think that's something.
Yeah, or whether it's 2 rows of parking or 3, I don't think it's really a city council conversation.
I get you. I get you in there, but we can't put all this stuff off on them, because this is where
Rubber meet the
the
road.
buck stops right here, and we can't be holding some appointee responsible when people come screaming about.
That's why we wanted to ask. How do you want us to do it? We got to do something different than we're doing now.
I agree with Councilman Cherry and Moody. I think we need to do that, and especially on these special occasions. And plus, we've got 2 of our liaisons there can make sure that we're abreast of what's going on. So, yeah, I agree with that. Bill, you got something?
Yeah, one other question. We're talking about the length of the process. Where do we stand as the process of changing from form-based code still going on? I know that was going to take a while.
Yeah, well, the form-based code, I'll just say this, the form-based code and our D1 are actually almost exact, they're almost mirror images of each other. And we're going back, that's obviously greatly affected by both the setback issues with the required building lines. It's also affected by a lot of the modifications that were intended. So we're going to have to take a different tack, a different look, but what you're likely to see is relatively quickly we're going to come back and have a few more things require use permits on those, where we're going to modify some of the standards. But we've got to deal, I think, from our standpoint, some of these questions related to the setbacks, some of those kind of issues we're going to do. So we're working on those. That's become we got a little detour here on this Type 2 thing that came out from the Supreme Court, but we are working diligently on bringing those back.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else?
I have a question, but it's not with Bob. It's about the previous item. I wanted to ask.
Anything else, Bob? Okay. You good? We're good with those items coming to us?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Yeah, Ms. Meeks.
I wanted to ask Brian one thing. The additional sludge, basically you said, you've been doing it
Right.
on every 2-year basis.
Right, and we removed more every 2 years.
Right.
And
I was wondering, because we had to increase it about 120-some thousand, could we put it off, add it to next year, or?
well, I mean, I'd have to. It's possible. I'd have to look. I mean, we do have to remove so much each year. We did do. We've awarded the bid because I say we were a notice of award. I mean, we haven't signed a contract, and we're just trying to get the fund. I mean, we do have some contingency dollars in our budget that we could use to cover it. We just didn't want to use that in the first month of the budget. But if that's what we need, our preference would be to go ahead and do the work because we need to maintain that removal schedule so we remain in compliance with our permit because that's a permitted.
So we're allowed so many tons to stay on site?
Yeah. So we do, it's a DEQ BPDES permit that we need to stay in compliance with, and that's why we do that. There's certainly we certainly have sufficient funds in our fund balance, and we expect although the year's not closed out because we're still doing accruals and all for last fiscal year, we expect to for revenues to exceed expenditures for 15. The year we just completed, probably at least around $1 million. So there's plenty. So we view it as it's certainly not a financial burden.
Right.
So we would respectfully ask that you do that. But if you're not comfortable with that, we do have some contingency dollars, but we'd like to. Not knowing what might come up during the year, we have an aged system. That's why we sort of like to hold that back if we can.
All right. Thanks, Brian.
All right. The next item is a review of our update to the floodplain management plan. Meg Pitcher's going to give that presentation. You recall back in May, I believe it was, Council adopted a revised floodplain ordinance. Well, this is the guidelines that go along with that ordinance.
We met all. I know you had said there was some deadlines we had to meet to make sure people's bills on this. We met all those deadlines.
Yes, sir. We did with the adoption of the ordinance. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Godfrey. Mr. Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, as Mr. Godfrey said, we've been doing a lot of flood stuff because it's every day. We're going to try and keep it so that it's not confusing, but just to sort of touch on what Mr. Cherry said, we did get official notice from FEMA and from the state that our ordinance was accepted. We're in compliance. The maps went into effect last Monday, August 3rd. We're good to go. New regulations in effect, and we're moving forward with that. So sort of the partner with that is the floodplain management plan. The ordinance is a set of regulations. It's sort of, it controls what happens with development and activities that occur in the floodplain. I like to say it's what we make other people do. It's what we have to do too, but it's what controls what other people do. The floodplain management plan is a guidance document that helps guide the city, what our activities are, what we're going to do to manage flood risks and those kind of things, and make sure that it doesn't conflict with other things. So when James is doing something, when Yusuf is doing something, that we make sure that we're all sort of going in the right direction and provides us with guidance. It's not a regulatory document, but it's guidance, and it's a document that is adopted by City Council. So the goals are basically, to protect citizens, to protect property, and to make sure that people can use the property, but being flood protected to the best extent possible. It's not possible to protect everything from everything. We're not going to move every house out of the floodplain, every structure out of the floodplain. There have been towns and cities that have done that. Certainly we're not proposing that. That's not going to happen. So we want to make sure that we protect them to the best degree possible. And this is the third update. Some communities use the all hazard mitigation plan as their floodplain management plan. Portsmouth has always been on the forefront of this issue, having a separate standalone floodplain management plan. I like to tell people it's so we're not just checking the box saying we have a plan. It's a document that actually means something. And we think that it's a more proactive step rather than just relying on the all hazards plan, which sort of talks about a lot of different things. We partnered with the Army Corps of Engineers for this update, so there were no costs to the city other than staff time. I'd like to introduce you to Michelle Hamer here from the Corps of Engineers. She is the chief of the floodplain management section in the Corps right here in the Norfolk office, and she did the lion's share of the work. So a big shout out to Michelle for agreeing to take this on in the federal budget and doing the work for us. She was there anytime we needed her, came and met with us multiple times. We went over there. They have a very nice building over there. We went over there a few times, met on the water, watched the boats go by. And so we've been working on this for just almost a year now. You may remember that City Council appointed a floodplain management task force to help us with this. We have Ron Lovell in the back there from the Hampton Roads Realtors Association, who has been providing us with input from that segment. We tried to get professionals from lots of different segments. We got citizens from different communities, people from the military, the schools, cooperative extension, and we really, I always tell this group, and I probably said it to this group was so interactive. They came and they provided input, they came in the snow, and they didn't just sit there and listen to what we had to say, because as I tell people, we already know what we think. But they actually provided a lot of input and were really helpful in this process. And they were diverse. It wasn't just some segment. Mark, who I think is in Sweden, was on the group, and he probably will come to the next meeting. And we really got a lot of input. And they gave us input, and then they're helping us with our next segment, which is the PPI, which is the Program for Public Information, to help get the message out to people, how we should get that message out to people about flooding. So we met for 5 months, again, through the snow. We had all of that input. We crafted it all into this giant document that you have a copy of that hopefully you'll get a chance to read through before we bring it back at your next meeting for the first official reading. We went to the Planning Commission last month, and they took it in very well and approved recommendation for it to be adopted. Again, we're going to have the first reading at your next meeting. But then the task force is going to come back together in the fall and sort of go over, what happened. NOAA has said hopefully we'll have a small hurricane season. We could still get nor'easters. But just to sort of see what happened, what we've done, and to move forward in the process. So it's not just a static thing that once we're done, we're done. The plan has a lot of elements in it. It talks about our flooding history. And I always tell people Portsmouth has flooded, I think, since Portsmouth existed. Mm-hmm. It's always been there. So we want to recognize that and what's happening. And you'll see in the plan that talks about the flooding has actually gotten more intense and more frequent, the number of storms that rise to that level. We talk about sea level rise in the plan because the flood maps that we have, I talked about this before, don't include sea level rise. And we know, the mayor knows, sea level rise is happening. Why it's happening, you can debate. The fact that it's happening, you really can't debate. We have data from the Sewell's Point tide gauge going back over 80 years, and the water's going up. There's at no point where the trend goes down. Will it go down with the next dinosaur age? Who knows? But it's not going down. It's going up. So we want to address what that's going to mean. Mr. Baldwin will talk to you about the fact that the comp plan, actually, you're required to talk about what you're going to do with sea level rise in the comp plan. So this is part of that. We talk about the severely repetitive loss structures and repetitive loss structures because the number of those structures is sort of an indicator, is one of the indicators of what the flood level is in the city and in the locality. Talk about financial aspects because none of this is free. There's not $1 billion sitting out there to do some of this stuff. None of this is free. So we have to talk about that piece of it. There are continuing actions. There are things we're going to be doing all the time. And then there are long-term actions. Some of these things are going to take, some time. It's not going to happen tomorrow, some of these things. I talked about the repetitive loss maps. So we have a series of these maps that talk about where properties have been repeatedly flooded. Some of these are in the flood zones. You see these colored areas down here. This is the flood depth, some of these. And then these areas up here are where the repetitive loss areas are. Some of them are in a flood zone, some of them aren't. If you remember the Churchland Village apartments and the KinderCare flooding, that's not in the flood zone. It's, it's some of those are below the street level, and that's part of why they flood. But there's a series of these maps throughout there, so people can look at it and say, hey, this property that I want to move in here down on Lincoln Street, has that experienced flooding? And we really can't disclose that information if they've had a flood claim because it's protected by privacy laws, but we can say it is or isn't in a repetitive loss area, and you might want to take a look at, what you might do. We utilize these maps in these areas to do additional outreach to these areas and say you might be at more risk because your street floods, your area floods. So we use this information to do additional outreach and target these people for making sure that they know what's going on.
Do you write them, or do you go door to door?
We send them a letter. We send them a letter, 2-page letter that says, here's what's going on. You might want to look at this series of things to help protect you and your property. Contact us. Here's our website. Here's our contact information. Here's some things that you might look at doing, and those sort of things. Because it's, because of privacy laws, we can't identify that it's this one building that floods. We're going to say it's this whole area, so we're going to send everybody in that area a letter. Because just because you haven't, we tell people, just because you haven't flooded ever, doesn't mean you're not going to flood tomorrow. There's no history of anything happening until it happens the first time. So we capture a larger area rather than just to that one individual house, because it could be you next time instead of your neighbor. So the plan outlines a series of activities to help Portsmouth be more resilient. There's some general activities, some of that is outreach. There's economic development activities, because again, we have, a lot of waterfront property that we want to make sure we preserve those to be viable for economic development reasons. Infrastructure, and that's things like roads and, and stormwater pipes and those kind of things. Environmental quality activities. It's the very first slide you may have noticed is Paradise Creek Nature Park. It's important for us to preserve the natural floodplain functions. That's what protects our river from continuing to get polluted and that sort of thing. So we want to make sure that we aren't doing things in the floodplain that are damaging it, and that we're protecting that. We're outreaching to people, explaining to them why it's important to not dump stuff down the storm drain, to clean the leaves out of the gutter and that sort of thing. And then again for the repetitive loss areas. So our next step, we will come back, like I said, officially to your meeting. We wanted to give you sort of an advance here so you could take a look at what's in the plan, make sure you're comfortable with it. But we would, go for adoption. Hopefully we'll come back for the second reading, after that. And then we will start implementing the actions in the plan. Some of them we're already doing because they're continuous activities. And then again, we will review the plan at regular intervals because it's a living document. This is not something that's just going to go be on the shelf and we did that, we'll come back in 5 years. It's not that kind of document.
Megan, do we know what the impact on property values are going to be with the redrawing of these boundaries?
We don't, because that's sort of a movable floor, if you will. It's going to sort of depend on each individual property, right? James sent me a video this week of a house in the UK, I think, that was actually built to, as the water comes in, it floats up on a concrete foundation, and then when the water goes back down, it goes back down. I thought that was pretty awesome.
Like a floating pier.
Yeah, but it was actually...
Are there any other areas that we could at least get a best guess estimate of what that is?
We might start, tracking where maybe some of the, with the real estate and with the assessor and stuff like that, maybe track where some of that goes. If, is it affecting? We did have a thing where, Jane had a number of houses that were foreclosed on, and we took that and mapped that against the floodplain to see if that was one of the factors, and it didn't seem to be for that series of data, didn't seem to be contributing. There weren't a lot of them that were actually in flood zones. So that's a good thing.
I would think because again, would want to do that.
Yeah, we can take a look at that. Because what I try to tell people, you may have read this in the paper because I said it to a reporter, it's not Chicken Little, the sky is falling. There are things you can do. You've got $5 million going into the Seaboard building down here and renovating that. It's in a flood zone, smack dab in the middle of the flood zone. So it's not tear the building down and make it a park, although, I would love that. But but it's not Chicken Little, the sky is falling. There are things you can do. They're floodproofing that building. They're building a wall around it, so to protect it from flooding. Over here in Breeden, the first apartment, the bottom floor is at 21 feet off the ground, so that the garage may flood, and we've got provisions in there for them moving their cars, but you're not going to have people's houses get flooded. You know, Admiral's Landing, they're up high. So, you know, the garage may flood, but people aren't going to flood. You know, so it's looking at those things. You know, what can you do? It isn't doom and gloom. You know, there are things. People can put in flood vents. People can elevate, and it's but unfortunately, it's an individual situation for all those. There's not some, hey, let's do this for everybody, because it's just sort of all depends. If you're brick, veneer, slab on grade, you can have a hard time elevating that house. You know, but if you have a nice crawl space, you might be able to, and some of those have been done.
Thanks.
Yeah, Mr. Meek?
What's the sea level per year? What does it rise at?
It's been about 1.46 feet over the past 100 years. It's what, 1.5 millimeters per year? 4.6 millimeters a year. So it's been about 1.5 feet over 100 years. But you've seen the curves we've shown before. They are expecting it to not be linear. They're expecting it to get worse because there are more things that are impacting it. We have subsidence, we've got land ice that's melting, we've got the water heating up. We've got, unfortunately, in our area, you got part of the Gulf Stream. It's actually pushing the water up. So there's a number of contributing factors. But about 1.5 feet over the past 100 years is what we've already seen.
1.5 feet over 100 years.
Which is a lot. And like I said, they're you know, by 2100,
over the next
by 2100, it could be anywhere from another 1.5 feet to 7 feet at the worst case scenario. We probably think it won't be 7 feet, but it's probably worse than what they were saying a few years ago, is what the models are now saying, the new data from VIMS and ODU is saying.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, yes, Vice Mayor?
I was just going to say thank you for actually giving us this in advance. It's not like, here it is and vote on it at 7 o'clock.
We try and communicate if we can. So.
Done good, Matt. Thank you. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Yes, sir.
All right, that's it. Is that it?
Well, I would like to report to you on the status of the audit that we asked our independent auditors to do.
Okay.
Yesterday, Judy and I met with them, and they're not completed, but they're close. And I thought I'd tell you what we asked them to do specifically, what they've done so far, and sort of give you a status of that. We asked them to do a forensic audit of the expenditures in the Waste Management Fund, utilizing agreed upon procedures. And those procedures were to look at written procedures of documentation of every transaction in the fund, to compare expenditures with accounting records and the budget, and to do a thorough testing of the transactions with regards to the procurement process. And they are still completing their test work. To this point, they have not found any matters of non-compliance, but they are still doing that. Once they complete that test work, a procedure of acceptable auditing standards requires them to have a concurring partner to review their work. And so because of that, I think they're still about 2 weeks out from me being able to give you that report. But it is underway, and we just had a status briefing of it yesterday.
2 weeks out. Yes, sir. Yeah, please.
Thank you for that information. But, you know, your department heads are here just about every meeting. Your contract officers are here about every meeting. Your deputy manager, now that we have one, is here every meeting. When you spend that kind of money, after we said in April not to spend a dime on equipment or vehicles, and it still goes on, then it hits the newspaper and our phones get blowed up. We can't just say, okay, it was followed to a T, it wasn't nothing wrong. We sat right here in this room. I think Paige said, no, the council wished there was no spending on vehicles or equipment till we got through the budget season. And it still happened. So we have to have something broken somewhere. You know, if it's through the contract officer. Yes, they had it in their budget, but it wasn't bought on some of the stuff. And already this year we bought equipment. And and we asked for no equipment to be put in the budget and trucks. So we have, something's broken, because all these people out here, their taxes got raised, and the 3 cents we went up, we probably could have gave them a cent back, and we didn't buy that equipment.
Could have.
Just on that equipment, not counting all the other stuff that was bought.
So I guess to take what your report here with a grain of salt and what they're going to do and anticipating another 2 weeks of, if they're bumping it up and measuring it against things that we have that probably are not sufficient, then they're probably not going to find anything, because the whole thing needs to be tossed out the window, and then that makes everybody say, hey, we did follow the rules. But Councilman Meeks is correct.
Well, one of the other things we're going to ask them to do is
in here every meeting.
Yes, sir.
And everybody was known full well what the directive from this council was.
Yes,
so
sir.
if anybody thinks if a report's going to come back and say we were all happy and dandy, well, I'll wait for that one to come back, and then we'll open that window and show you a few out.
We've asked them to give us a report of best practice recommendations as well, and so that'll accompany the report.
So it's a best practice to follow council directives.
Yes, sir.
You better believe
I
it. Right.
understand.
You better believe it. Yes, sir,
Well,
Mr. Moody.
well, maybe this is not included in the scope of work, but beyond the actual purchasing of the equipment is the request for payment. And there again, maybe the procedures were followed, but like the mayor just said, maybe when you're following bad procedures, you still get the same effect. And I'm talking about the request for payment, that nobody raised their hand or questioned that. Is that included in the scope of work?
They're going to look at the process of procurement from the point that it is procured to the point that it is ordered to the point that payment is made, and whether or not those are in compliance with our financial policies or out of compliance, and they'll make a finding.
Well, what I'm getting at, I think anytime someone requests a check for approximately $500,000 and nobody raises their hand or goes to their supervisor and say, hey, I got a request for a check for $500,000, is this authorized?
That's a problem.
That's a big problem.
No way that should happen. And I don't give a rat's butt about a procedure that a director or the manager or deputy manager don't sign off on that. That is an F.
Understood.
Yes, sir.
When we have in the public meeting, can Brian give that explanation for that equipment purchase again for the general public?
Yeah.
Because
not only for information but for education.
Yeah.
Let them know this is how it's supposed to be done. I agree, Brian. If you would prepare yourself.
Well, and that's also a very thing we trusted the school board for not doing.
Absolutely.
So it's a good teaching moment.
y'all want to send them to jail. So
Right.
what about
That's
now?
right. That's right. That's right. What's good for the gooses. But okay. So we're 2 weeks out.
Yes, sir.
All right, anything else there? Okay, any liaison reports? And well, actually, before we get to that, I do want to mention to the council, as you know, we're vastly approaching this 2018 decision with SIPSA and what this region is trying to get their arms around on how we're going to do our waste disposal. It is no secret to anybody in this city that we probably agreed to probably the worst deal in the history of this city back when it was done with SIPSA. And I, for one, do not and will not let that happen under our watch. I think it is imperative that we put a committee here together. I've talked to Councilman Meeks and asked him if he would serve on it, and I think we need our two representatives, Ms. Cordell as well as Luke McCoy, the manager and the CFO and myself, to start meeting on a regular basis to make sure that we are apprised on what our options are, whether Suffolk or Virginia Beach or someone, Chesapeake, everybody now is posturing and wanting to play in this, and we've got a lot of noise in this harbor, and there are councils all over this region talking about what they'd like to do and trying to coerce people. It behooves us to look at what our opportunities are here, whether it is a go-alone, which is a viable option here, or whether or not we do something that SIPSA or some others are working on. And so I don't want us to be caught off guard as a council. I think we need to start bringing those matters to this council and looking at what, because we are in a very good position, I think, and for once, and $6 million in municipal waste and the opportunities that we have going forward in 2018 and out, I think could have a tremendous impact on our future budgets and taxpayers' dollars. So, and Mr. Meeks has agreed to serve, but I want to make sure I get a blessing from you guys that we do this, and that and we will report back. And we probably need to start exploring options, because again, we've got a lot of things going on, and I mean, you know, we're right now paying $125 a ton. We were up as much as $175 a ton. Our citizens are paying way too much, and right now I'm hearing numbers ranging from $30 a ton to $75 a ton, and we can go out of town and get things cheaper than that, and there's some things we can do here. I think we need to explore that, and I think it needs to be more directed to what our possibilities are here and what are the viable options. And so I'd like to stand that up, and I want to make sure I get y'all's blessing on that, because I think it's imperative, and I think some of these other things can fall under this waste management committee, and maybe we can be able to streamline some of these other things that may be coming down the pipeline, with some of the possibilities with our landfill, extending the lifetime of that landfill, and what that could do for us here as of a matter of budgets. And so I think that's vitally important. And everybody I talked to that was associated with that last SIPSA deal agreed that this city, Portsmouth, took the worst of it. And that won't happen again. And I think it's all of our responsibility to make sure that we understand, you know, where we're actually set it. And I think we're in a very good, I think we're in the driver's seat, to be honest with you, on this thing. So if there's no objections to that, I'd like for us to do that. And we will be briefing council and calling you but we've got a gold mine here, and I think we need to start utilizing it, and this could evolve into our whole piece with future recycling and land use, and what we'll do with our landfill, and what some and capital investments we could possibly make to be able to do things on our own, or leverage our opportunities with SIPSA, with Wheelabrator, or whoever else may be coming down the pipeline with something that they think is the next great idea. I think we owe it to our citizens to do that, and Dan, I want to thank you for that. I mean, I know last year we tried to calm you down when you was jumping through the roof, because we wanted to get a little bit of more information. I think now we've got more than we can stand when it comes to information. It's just, what are we doing with it, how we're applying it, and who are the people that we have minding the store here in this city, and whether or not we're giving it proper oversight from a council perspective. And I think that's key. Yeah. It really is. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we asked Sharon there and made her the permanent member on that board there. But we need that feedback here, and then we need to be looking internally at our opportunities. Yes, sir.
I agree with you, Mayor. Can we get a where we are today, where we're sitting right now today?
And that's exactly what I want to get, because I don't even know where we are today.
That's what I'm asking.
Right.
I don't know where we are today.
I can tell you I've been to lunch with people that know way more about what's going on than I think.
But it's a piece here.
This council chair. That's right. And so absolutely. We're going to find out, here we are, day one right now. These are the opportunities, and this is what's being presented, or what's going to be presented. Okay, and here's how we should be receiving that data, and here's how we should absorb that, and here are the things that we all need to know what we can do here in the city without the rest of the region, and the things that we could possibly do here that would help save some of our neighboring cities if Wheelabrator doesn't sharpen their pencil, or if these things don't work out like this year. Mr. Meeks, if I said anything?
No, you
Okay.
said everything was all right.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Vice Mayor.
I'm with you 100%.
Okay.
I talked to Luke McCoy just today, actually, about this, and I said, I feel like I know nowhere near what I should with this looming, really important decision coming up, and I'm with Paige. Could we, in August or September, have Sharon and Luke sit here and say, okay, council, here's where we are now, and then y'all do your stuff and come back and...
They got a
leave it
vote
so
sooner than that, don't they?
I mean, we got a lot of catching up to do.
They have a vote soon, right?
Well, in September supposedly, but we, SIPSA,
A vote on what?
well, they're not on the use and support agreement, but at this point, they've presented, all three, I guess, options have come and presented to the board. And so we've only had one actually come in person and present. So I think they're going to expect some type of vote with regard to which one to go with.
Maybe we should have a special...
That's some problem in there, but I don't know what they're voting on.
I understand.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I want this committee, and I need to call her, Luke, and the manager. We need to sit down and find out where we are today, and because, again, a lot of the noise we're hearing is just that. It's noise because people are trying to lay out their version of what they think we ought to do. Our dear friends over in Chesapeake has a vision of what they like, and they're trying to run around and leaking to different people how cool it is if we sent everything over to what they want to do. And so, yeah, sure they do, will. And so that's why I say we need to make sure we educate our council and our folks and make sure we are knowing when we hear noise and knowing when there's something actually legitimate. So, yeah, we want to do that post-haste. I want to try to do that within the next week or so. Mr. Moody.
Mayor, I would suggest that we request SIPSA to have a couple of their members that did the presentation that's going to be voted on to come to this work session and present it live.
But that could very well be the next step after we find out where we are and say, hey, come in here, we need to...
That wasn't by SIPSA, though, was it?
No, it wasn't by SIPSA.
Well, whoever
It was
presented
one of the proposals, we required more information, and they came and did a presentation.
Okay. But we'll get on that, and...
We can get that scheduled within the next week.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need to sit down and at least find out where we are. And,
Three options, right?
Yes, sir.
One is SIPSA managed, but SIPSA's going to manage all of it, right?
Yes, sir.
One would be the facility they're building over in Chesapeake.
Yes, sir.
One would be hauling
the
it.
brick format. And
Yep. The other one would be hauling it to King and Queen under Republic.
Yes. Yes, sir. Republic.
And the third one would be, if they do a deal with Wheelabrator.
Wheelabrator.
Okay. That's correct.
And I'll tell all y'all, when we do any of those deals, they need to fire all of us.
Well, y'all get the information and bring it.
I can share with you, I've chatted and I've eaten. I made sure we've eaten the dinner and they've paid for it before I told them. Not only no, but hell no, but can't miss those nice meals. But anything. Any other liaison reports? Or, yeah.
This is really not my thing, but I'm going to bring it up because I came up the elevator with Linda Radnera, wherever she is.
In the back.
And she mentioned that she wanted to bring a PCC report to us, but she didn't think she could do it in 3 minutes. And so I suggested we could ask for that to be done in a work session in 10 minutes.
Okay.
I have another complete subject that's not a liaison report.
Okay. The community meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so, gentlemen, we have gotten criticized all over the kingdom for canceling a community meeting. And I just want to remind you that in January at our last community meeting, and I invite you to look at the tape that is under our tapes on the City of Portsmouth page, 12 minutes into the meeting, because there was nobody getting up to speak, the mayor brought up to the crowd that was there, at all of our urging, hey, citizens, what do you think about these meetings? Another citizen got up and spoke about a different subject. And so 21 minutes into the meeting, we got back to the subject at hand, which was how do we make community meetings more interesting, more appealing? Are they at the wrong time of day, in the wrong format, at the wrong place? Are they too often, not often enough? Linda Ridenauer spoke and said she thought they should be for just special issues. Betty Ashbury got up and agreed with Linda Ridenauer. Ryan Hines got up and suggested some sort of social media format that could be more interactive with younger folks or people who didn't get out and drive. Mark Godolgi-Utrowski got up and talked about better advertising. I'm on there saying, and I remember doing this, there were 15 citizens at the meeting, 2 of whom were little children, and everybody else at the meeting was paid to be there, all of you folks that sit around the room. We talked a lot about social media and having some sort of interactive format. Mr. Rowe was the manager then. He got up and talked a lot about the clickers that you brought up, about if people were in the room with us, we could ask about issues and they could click yes or no. Mr. Moody suggested that we put sandwich boards out in neighborhoods where that we were going to be, sort of like civic leagues do. And 54 minutes later, we adjourned, saying we were going to talk about that. Everybody in the room agreed that the concept of the meeting was not working in its current format, and we talk about some other type of concept. And we haven't done that. So we either need to have another meeting to talk about it, or sit down and talk about it, or something. It's just floating out in thin air.
I think sometimes you don't miss something until it's gone, and I think it's one of those things that that night, and I remember discussing it very vividly now, but it was a relatively small group there, and
15.
I heard what they said, and with the exception of maybe the first meeting in January, I think the attendance went down each meeting that we had. But probably to do away with it, I don't know. I still think it's good. I just don't think we advertise the fact that we come into your community to have a meeting. And I think we need to vary that. For the last 8-9 years, we've had them at the 3 same places. There are other Civic League facilities and things like that we could go to. I think we got in a rut with them. And I think we should go there and get back to the, listening. Maybe if it's something going on in that community, we present it and field questions specific to that area that we're in. But I would like to see us go back and maybe have one before the year's out, maybe in October or something like that.
I don't disagree that we need to have something. I think we need to find out what is the right thing, because we keep talking in circles, and I don't care if we have it in the middle of the Sports Hall of Fame. If nobody wants to come, they're not going to come. And in the last 5 years that I've been here, we've had 2 that's had any kind of decent attendance, and it was because of the Potash Company, and the other one was because of the mansion. And outside of those 2 issues, in the last 5 years, we have sat around and wasted our time twiddling thumbs, staring at each other, and waiting and trying to find out when's a good time to say good night, because nobody's here to say anything, or the same people coming up and saying the same things that they just want to hear themselves talk. And I don't mind doing that, but I want to make sure we're doing things that the citizens, and if they're engaged, and if it's not that format, if there is another format, we need to explore that and make sure we're doing the right thing. I mean, some people are not comfortable coming out in a crowd like that and saying those things. Some people come and want to talk, and soon as the first person gets up there and throws a shot across the bow, then it scares the hell out of everybody else in the room, and they say, well, we don't want to talk about that because we were here for something else. And so we've got to find out how to get engaged and in contact with these people, whether it's social media, whatever it is. And that's why we brought up the clicker thing, because Hampton and Williamsburg and a couple other cities had talked about it a couple of years ago, and it was amazing how well it was received and how citizens responded on what they like and did not like. As a matter of fact, the city of Hampton used it a couple of years ago, and they raised their taxes 24 cents, and they thought they'd all get run out of the door. But when they presented it, and when they laid out all the facts, it was amazing how many people there were in favor of raising taxes because they wanted to have those things. So it's not about raising taxes, it's about, do you let one or two people who don't want to do something dominate the airway, and the other ones that may not have the same view don't want to stand up and talk. And so those people just stop coming. And so then you kind of wind up with the same crowd you have here. So I think we need something, because you don't. I mean, I think, Fred, you did that, one of the things we did with the food truck over at Norcom, and just letting people vent and talk. Some of that stuff just went on, but I sat in the back of the room, and I enjoyed it because I got to see people engaging and just standing up and saying what they thought and what they like and did not like. And that's what we want in these community meetings. This is not something for these same 3 or 4 people to come and grandstand, and then we sit here and blame each other that we're not doing the right thing. So I think we need to find out what that right thing is. And I mean, we've got scheduled on our agenda, I believe September the 12th, I see Norcom another community meeting, unless we elect to not have that or do something else. And I'm open to doing anything that we think is the right thing, but I just don't buy into this moving it over here to Cavalier Manor or Highland Bitmore is going to get more people. If people are engaged and they can drive 2 blocks, they can drive 4 blocks. It's whether or not they want to come and whether or not they want to share what their thoughts are. Yes,
Vice Mayor, what did Mark Gildowski said? What did he?
His criticism was all about advertising.
Yeah.
He didn't have a criticism about having a meeting. His was that people didn't know about it.
Right, advertising.
Yeah, it had been advertised in the previous Sunday's Currents. It had been on all the gazillion emails that Mr. Pace sends out. Half the world had it on Facebook. I don't know where else you put it.
And the community leaders need to know, the civic leaders.
And they all get
know,
it.
Right? They all get that stuff, right?
Didn't we, LaVoice, you put a questionnaire online for something? Maybe it was the food trucks, where people could, or the thing we did for recreation. Mm-hmm. We had an online questionnaire. Mm-hmm. Why can't we do that for community meetings?
Advertising, that's it.
Well, yeah, I mean, but let's ask the
but that
citizen.
didn't go as well as it should, and so
Well,
the chairman of that board took it among himself to go door to door.
Well, maybe.
I mean, because we put it online and we still didn't get a good response, and so he went door to door, and that's why I applauded him for his efforts, because everything you're doing, you're not getting that kind of response that you really know you need to get out of the community. And so we got to find out what is the right thing, and I'm sure our marketing person can help us with that. But just having a standing meeting, and we can beat ourselves to death saying we didn't advertise enough, we didn't put enough signs out. These folk know they either don't want to come or we don't have anything that's interesting for them to talk about. Because they showed up when the mansion was on the agenda, they couldn't get in the door. And when we had that potash company, I had folks I'd never seen before there. So, I mean, the information is there. So if it's something that they're interested or not interested in, I mean, that's probably the ticket. And I think that's why someone mentioned, why don't we make it item specific? Was it Linda? It was somebody that said, hey, maybe if it's subject specific, if we got a topic, then we could have the meeting. And so...
Well, that's what Bill just said.
Yeah.
Why don't we, since we only have a few of them a year, why don't we also utilize reverse 911 to remind people? That would be an option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so where we stand now is we've got a meeting, is it September the 12th? We've got it on our agenda.
Let's say we want people to come so they can tell us what they want.
Tell us what they want. Well, and that's why I used the last meeting as an opportunity, because we're all sitting there listening to crickets.
We heard from 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 15.
Right. We heard about 4 out of 15 people. And so, I mean, I didn't want the meeting to be a waste. So that's why I say, well, why don't we just see if we can't get some feedback. 12 minutes in, you literally
almost adjourned the meeting because nobody was getting up.
Right, nobody was getting up, and so anyway, what's the pleasure here? do we want to go ahead and go forward with the September the 12th meeting?
Yeah.
Well,
The 12th is a Saturday, I think, isn't it?
It's the 14th.
the 14th. I'm sorry. Yeah, help me, clerk. Yeah.
And
the
which place is it
12th
at?
is on the
It's
14th.
IC Norcom. Yeah, the 12th is on the 14th. Right. It's at IC Norcom, and maybe we can put something out. I mean, let them come. I mean, well, get them here. Talk about the recall. That might get half of them there, right?
Well, and let's talk about, let's tell people on camera.
Tell them that's what it's for. We're here to talk about
and
that.
we want
right.
you to come prepared to tell us that you want meetings at,
September
the 14th.
you know, do
at
you want
IC
it on
Norcom.
Saturday morning? Do you want it on Tuesday morning? Do you want it online?
Or do you want it period?
Do you want it on the radio, or do you just not need to have one?
I mean, because if it's not in the afternoons, because you do it in the afternoons because you think most people work. I mean, that was one of the reasons that we went with the coffee talk that the manager had at the fire stations, that some of those were pretty well attended. I mean, some people came out, but, I mean, we've tried different things, so it's not like we're not trying. And so, you know, and
Two of us.
and that's why I say we you know,
You said?
yeah, Norcom. I see Norcom September the 14th at 7 o'clock. Yeah, we did the coffee talk, and we've did several other types of things to try to get some engagement from people. And I just think we need to keep trying. But you know, that's our job to find out what it is to get citizens engaged. And
Well, they should have been engaged on Facebook in the last week or two.
right,
So
but that crowd,
that's why
that's the
I brought
same
it
crowd
up.
that never shows up and does anything else,
Well-
right? If you could be president if you was a Facebook guy. But anyway, all right, so we're going to stay with it for this one and see if we can't solicit from citizens ideas, dates, times, sweet spots to see just whether or not this is something that we want to continue, because really we don't want to waste taxpayer dollars. You don't want to have 15, 20 staff people being paid to be sitting in a room and nobody's there. I mean, that is a misuse of dollars and people's time, because we do respect our staff's time. These people have lives too, and they're going to come because we're going to have a meeting, and they're all leaving their families and homes and sitting there to try to make sure they capture whatever moment, to be able to answer whatever questions or whatever concerns that citizens may have. And if they're not there, then, you know, we owe it to them to be a little bit more responsible with their time. Yeah, Mr. Moody.
Here's an idea to try to get out of the box and maybe stir some new enthusiasm. Why don't we, instead of having it at a school, like all of them seems like they're in a school, we're sitting down by the stage, why don't we have it at Portside on the day, on the Thursday that we have Sunset Thursdays. We have our town meeting prior to the start time, and see if we can't get a big crowd and different venue.
Great idea.
Why don't we do that?
Yeah.
And I'll speak the day we get Chaka Khan. Get Chaka Khan. And I'll speak, me and Chaka.
Yeah, that'll make it even better.
Chaka's going to want a little money, ain't she? No, that is a
Great
great,
idea.
but that's what I'm saying. You got to utilize things that draw people.
drinking though, right?
Right.
Yeah, we do it first.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, guys,
I don't know if that's a good idea.
No, we do.
you cut it off at a certain time, right?
The meeting is before the event.
So we could go on September Thursday the 17th and start having our meeting at
Well, we got the golden opportunity at our community back to school day here at Antelos. We're going to have a stage. We're going to have citizens here. We're going to have kids there. You can use that opportunity to engage people coming in, out the door. We're going to have tables set up with civic leagues and folks there. It's a golden opportunity to use 5 or 10 minutes. Mr. Pace about to fall out of the chair. I think he wants Chaka Khan. Is that what you want?
Mr. Moody's idea with using the Sunset Thursdays is a better idea, I think, because it trends more demographic towards older people as opposed to the thing for the back to school. Kids become quickly bored with that if that happens on that day. But Sunset Thursday starts at 6:30, from 6:30 to 8. That means we would have to start at like maybe 5 o'clock, and I don't know if that's
No alcohol sold till 6.
right.
Now, if you ain't giving away alcohol,
more engagement if
alcohol or chicken, you ain't getting them right.
we would
need
have to
the
start it at like what 5 o'clock in order to.
Yeah, sure.
That'll give, but I don't know if that's going to give people enough time to get there. Or
You
not.
need the audience.
5:30.
If you're going to have an event,
5:30.
you need a 10-minute intermission while everybody's there. If you do it too early, they ain't coming until the drinks start or the show starts. So somewhere there needs to be a 5 or 10 minute intermission, and then we can spend that time having a little engagement, and then go right back while the band's getting their break or whatever.
That work.
Doing it before, they ain't coming early. They come in for the show. They ain't coming for us. They already think we're a sideshow as it is, but...
So do an intermission in between when they start at 6:30, between 6:30 and not, what is it, 9:30? And so do an intermission in the middle and then make that the community meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But can we set like an hour power?
It is a mechanism to get feedback, and we can just put it in there and make sure we put an asterisk that there were drinks involved on these responses, right?
Do we want to say how long the duration is for the community meeting within that meeting?
Oh, yeah. No, we don't,
Because
you don't want no more than 10 minutes. How long does a band take a break?
Well, they don't normally take a break. But what we do on Sunset Thursday, they don't take a break because it's only an hour and a half.
Y'all been down in this place?
Yeah.
Huh?
Some of them people, they're drunk within 30 minutes.
Some come drunk, right?
You're thinking the old port side.
Anyway, all right, good idea. Let's keep
home. They finished there.
We'll keep the 12th on the agenda, and hopefully this will be aired, and we'll get some people to come in. If nothing else,
It's
they can
cheaper
just
to start at home.
tell us what they don't like about what we're discussing here tonight. But yeah, we want to collect that data because it is important. Because whether we start this year or next year, we need to have something that is effective and that engage our citizens and all of our citizens, and stop letting ourselves and the media and everybody else capture what two people say, and then they report it that Portsmouth said, and that's unfortunate, and it always happens. It's one or two people that get painted as what our views are, and that's just, yeah.
I'm just thinking out loud here. I'd like to do that. You could take the Sunset Thursday for that 3 hours, and part of your, under the tent, have the city council table. Between the 7 of us, at least 5 of us might be able to put in 30 minutes at the table to, like Mr. Rowe did, coffee talk with the manager. We could have, sunset
community meeting
soirees with the council member. Maybe, so Mr. Moody has from 6 to 6:30, and I have from 6:30 to 7, and Bishop takes 7 to 7:30. I mean, everybody's not going to be available every week, but, it's not a bad idea.
I think it's great. Incorporate it. Handle it. What was that show? Handle it. Right.
Get her done.
All right. Anything else for the good?
I do.
Okay. We're adjourned.
All right. That's going to be herding cats, but anyway.
Do you like herding cats?